Welcome back. This is part 2 of our lecture on crisis art. Looking back through history, crisis art was more likely a response to the brutality of war than the kinds of issues facing us today. During the French Revolution, at the height of the Reign of Terror in 1793, neoclassical painter Jacques-Louis David created a memorial to his friend, a publisher and leader of the revolution, Jean Marat, who had been murdered. Painted in 1824, Eugene Delacroix's Massacre at Chios depicts the 1822 military attack by Ottoman forces on the inhabitants of Chios. Imagine spending days and days on end, the artist creating this image of suffering and defeat. 20,000 people died in this attack. The 70,000 that survived were forced into slavery. Jealous of the Spanish presence in the New World, French Emperor Napoleon III installed the Austrian ally Maximilian as ruler of Mexico. The Mexicans hated him, and after 3 miserable years of failure to collect riches, the French departed, leaving Maximilian to be executed by a firing squad commanded by Benito Juarez, the former ruler of Mexico, whom Maximilian had displaced. In June 1867. Painter Edouard Manet was opposed to Napoleon's policies and almost immediately got to work studying accounts of the event. He would create 3 large paintings, an oil sketch, and a lithograph on the same subject. Revealed months after the Basque town of Guernica was bombed and burned to rubble by Nazi planes supporting Franco's nationalists during the Spanish Civil War in 1937, Pablo Picasso's painting Guernica is an iconic artistic protest against the horrors of war. Bertolt Brecht's play Mother Courage and Her Children is considered one of the most important anti-war plays of all time. Written about the same time as Guernica, a couple of years later in 1939, the piece was set in the 17th century during the 30 Years' War, but warned against the rise of fascism and Nazism that was happening in the present. It follows Anna Fearling, a canteen woman with the Swedish army, better known as Mother Courage, who tries to make a profit off the war in order to survive, but ends up losing all 3 of her children to the war. This image here is of a contemporary revival of the play, translated by Tony Kushner, starring Meryl Streep. It's not surprising we can find a lot of work created at this time. Dmitri Shostakovich began writing his massive Seventh Symphony during the Nazi attack of Leningrad, in which 600,000 people would die. Arthur Miller's The Crucible was a thinly veiled attack on McCarthyism, the campaign against alleged communists in the United States waged by Senator Joseph McCarthy from 1950 to 54. That's McCarthy there on the upper left. Many of the accused were blacklisted or lost their jobs, though they did not, in fact, belong to the Communist Party. They were simply nonconformists in many cases, or scapegoats abused to scare Americans into falling in line. That's the playwright Arthur Miller there on the bottom left, and he was married to Marilyn Monroe at one point, if you believe that. And over on the right-hand side, that's a production of the original stage play of The Crucible. Created decades after the 1960 civil rights movement in America, when children were injured by the fierce blasts of water from fire hoses police used to spray the crowd in order to force demonstrators into submission, Theaster Gates' Civil Tapestry series used strips of decommissioned fire hoses to create his work. There was a clear acknowledgement here of our country's ongoing crisis of inequality and disenfranchisement, and we'll be looking more at Theaster Gates's work once we get to sculpture. This is number 4 in that series. Earlier in the semester, we looked at the musical Rent, written in part in response to the AIDS crisis. Tony Kushner's Angels in America, a gay fantasia on national themes, was released in 1991. An enormous work in 2 dramatic parts, Millennium Approaches and Perestroika, the play won all the major awards and would later be adapted to a miniseries for HBO. The characters include a gay couple who break up when one partner, Lewis, cannot deal with the other's prior becoming sick from HIV. a former drag queen who's now a hospital nurse, a Mormon Republican law clerk who pretends to be straight but realizes he is gay and terrified of that, his depressed wife Harper, who's addicted to Valium and afraid to leave the apartment and hallucinates about the hole in the ozone layer, among other things. His conservative mother is in denial about her son's sexuality, or his conservative mother, I'm sorry. And we've got notorious attorney Ray Cohn, who's also in denial about his homosexuality, at least to the public, as he dies of AIDS pretending it's liver cancer. That's him on the far right. He is an old friend of Donald Trump's, which is why I used that picture. And there's a connection to the Crucible here. Uh, Cohn fought communists next to Joe McCarthy, so there's a point of interest. Now on his deathbed, Kushner imagines Cohn haunted by the ghost of Ethel Rosenberg, who he prosecuted as a treasonous spy and pulled strings to have executed. And last but not least, let's not forget the prophetic angel who appears to the dying prior in his fevered imagination. There are a few other characters, but the play was not only about AIDS, but also about everything America stands for or should. Other artwork inspired by the AIDS crisis includes activist paintings by Keith Haring. He's a native of Reading, PA. And the AIDS quilt, which was created in mourning by people all over the country as a memorial tribute to those lost to the disease and as a tool to raise awareness. In 3 decades, it grew to more than 10 acres in size. It's presumably the largest ongoing community folk art project in the world, composed of more than 50,000 3 by 6 foot panels commemorating more than 105,000 individuals. Since 1981, close to 636,000 people have died from AIDS in the United States, including 15,000 people in 2016. I mention it now because they're talking about it a lot in connection to the COVID-19. There are more than 1.1 million people living with HIV in the US today, it's estimated, although the number of new cases has dropped by nearly 20% since 2008. For perspective, AIDS activists point out that there were 418,500 Americans killed during World War II. For further perspective, we might also consider that 6 million Jews were killed by the Nazis in the Holocaust during World War II. The atrocities committed are so incomprehensible that little art was created, at least at first. Philosopher Theodor Adorno famously said to write poetry after Auschwitz is barbaric. It took time, but eventually art has been created in the shadow of that terrible slaughter. Most recently, Hunters, the TV show on Amazon, has taken on the topic in a Jordan Peele kind of way, but not without controversy. It's an interesting topic for another lecture. Other recent work we might consider is Boon Jong-ho's film Parasite, which won the Oscar for Best Picture for its striking exploration of income inequality. If you haven't seen this film, you should, and quickly. Before the coronavirus hit, inequality may have been the biggest problem the world was facing, and certainly the virus has done much already to show exactly how bad the problem of inequality has become. This week, we will look at examples of how artists are responding to the coronavirus. I want you to engage, experience something, and then tell us about it. Look beyond the Mona Lisa with masks and toilet paper, okay? In this week's Canvas module, you will find a list of links to some programs that I've already discovered in recent days. You want to look for hashtags like isolation creation. There's a whole bunch of stuff out there. You're not going to have trouble finding anything. A few days ago, for example, I responded to a call for plays by the 1 Minute Play Festival for a 2 character coronavirus microplay of no more than 150 words. And I'll include that in the module too, just for kicks so you can see what I wrote. Some of the art that's happening right now isn't speaking directly to our coronavirus experience, but it's being offered because of the isolation social distancing has caused. Perfectly productive adults are freaking out because they don't know how to keep their kids busy. Parents are sharing ideas and doing what they can to help each other. This too is social action. Artists offering their work, their time, their hope to whatever audience technology will reach in order to stay connected. Remember how we discussed that circle of artistic creation? Art is not complete until it has been viewed or otherwise experienced with its audience. In an article titled When a Pandemic Arrives at the Playhouse Door, published on March 16th in the New York Times, critic Alexis Solosky wrote, "Theater, we know, can create a conduit for empathy and provide a means to process complicated situations and feelings. It's only a matter of time before the first COVID-19 plays emerge, and we can, retrospectively, and assuming theaters are still a thing, be nudged toward compassion for the afflicted, be constituted be constituted as a community of support, because that's what theater can do. It can ask us to think and feel beyond the confines of our own experience and find fellow feeling immediately and intimately with those around us." This is a picture from a recent production of Samuel Beckett's play Endgame, something to check out if you're interested in theater and aren't familiar with it. "Compassion is an unstable emotion," Susan Sontag said following 9/11. "It needs to be translated into action or it withers. If one feels that there is nothing we can do, but who is that we? And nothing they can do either. And who are they? Then one starts to get bored, cynical, apathetic." So, your extra credit work this week is to create your own response to the coronavirus crisis. You don't have to, but you just may feel better if you do. And you can make someone else feel better if you share it. Looking forward to seeing what you guys come up with. Be safe, be healthy.